where she is currently the program director of this initiative at McGill University. She has a master's degree in international relations, foreign policy, and international cooperation from the University of Quebec in Montreal. She's authored and co-authored several papers, and she's presented on gender-based violence in armed conflict, particularly in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and on the gender discourses and practices in UN peacekeeping missions, humanitarian assistance, and international development. Her interests include the gender-based and sexual violence in conflict zones, in development and humanitarian assistance, professionalization of humanitarian workers, Canadian foreign aid policy, current reforms, and dilemmas in the humanitarian system. So we have a lot of experts on our panel today, and I think it will give us a chance to get some answers to many of the complex issues that have been presented to us via the film. I'd like to start just by asking a question to Fiona, if you don't mind. So Fiona, what I would like to just ask you is that from the film, what we've seen is that Congolese women are clearly powerful and organizing. And are you optimistic for the future?
It's a tough question, because Massacre herself is an extraordinary woman, and there are lots of amazing, extraordinary women like Massacre who are doing similar work. I think for things to change in a positive direction in Congo, it needs to be both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. And until the state really takes responsibility, and there's a reform of the army, the police, the judiciary, especially with the ending of impunity, as extraordinary as these women are, not a huge amount may change, because until there is peace and the end of fighting and the end of armed conflict, sexual violence will continue. So there has been a quiet period. It's quite interesting. There's been a 6-month sort of amnesty to try and encourage one particular militia group, the FDLR, to surrender and give up weapons. There's also been a much stronger mandate. With the UN has been given a much stronger mandate with an implementation force, and with a new Brazilian general who has been particularly proactive in enforcing this mandate. So things have improved, but at the same time, this 6-month period is about to end. Unfortunately, the FDLR didn't really surrender in any significant numbers, and everyone expects there to be another sort of renewal of fighting quite soon as that period comes to an end. So I think it needs to come, it needs to be a sort of multifaceted approach, continued international pressure. I think that it was very, it was very, very helpful what happened with the summit and William Hague and with Angelina Jolie, and the sort of light that has been shown on Congo, and the continued pressure put on not just on President Kabila but also on Kagame and on Uganda, and this needs to continue. And I think we need to continue to put pressure on our governments, especially the British government, to implement the things that have been promised.
Well, thank you for that. I just would have a follow-up question, then a last question for your promise, because you've been working hard here. Just in light of what you've just said to us, do you see a growing momentum of international political will in ending sexual violence in Congo?
Well, certainly there's been a huge change. When I first went to Congo in 2001, for obvious reasons, because of world events, it was almost impossible to get any media coverage of Congo at all. And a lot of that changed when Hillary Clinton went to Eastern Congo in 2006, 2007. That started to bring about a change, and I think with this renewed or continued pressure, things have started to change, but it has to be kept up. I think there's a whole issue with elections in Congo, and Kabila probably going to change the constitution so that you'll be able to run for election again, the same with Kagame in Rwanda, and it's been said that the reason the M23 rebel groups who were backed by Rwanda did withdraw was much more to, a lot of it was to do with behind the scenes diplomatic international pressure being put on President Kagame of Rwanda to support the M23, and with that they couldn't really continue the aggressive stance that they have in Eastern Congo. I think it'll also be very significant to see what happens with the trial of Bosco Ntaganda in the International Criminal Court that is said to start in June, because he has been, I think some of the charges will include sexual violence, and until now the International Criminal Court has felt that there hasn't been significant enough evidence in order to convict, and so they haven't been part of the charge that were dropped in November previously. So it will be very significant to see what happens with Bosco Ntaganda in that trial.
Okay, thank you very much. My next question is for you, I was just wondering, in your view, what would it take to end sexual violence in the DRC and other parts of the world? And also, what would you like to see happen?
Well, I mean, first of all, I just want to commend you on a wonderful film, harrowing to watch, and I think it just makes us reflect on the issues. And one of the things that I think is important to recognize when we talk about sexual violence during war is the taboo around it. That, you know, violence and sexual violence in war is not new. It's something that's happened historically over time. But it's actually something that we've only begun to talk about. I'd say that it's gained attention over the last few decades, and prior to that there's a huge silence around it. So I think, you know, your film really tries to break that silence and provides very marginalized groups of women and children to have a voice. And so I just want to thank you for that. So I think that that's part of it. I think it's breaking that silence. I think that the UK government has made huge steps in as Fiona was saying, in shedding light and bringing attention to it globally. I mean, I think that, you know, are we doing enough? I mean, the answer is no. That's the very short answer. I mean, when you talk to women and girls and boys as well, and men who've also been raped, and I think that that's something important to keep in mind. That, you know, post-conflict, there are very few, as the film demonstrated, resources to provide support to these survivors. And so what you have in many situations are victims who are forced to then see their perpetrator on a regular basis, and maybe living in the same community. And so there's a process of re-victimization that often occurs. So we're certainly not doing enough, and I think that the whole post-violence period is a really also important one to keep in mind when we're talking about intervention and action. The other element that I think is so important in terms of your film was bringing up the intergenerational aspects, that this is not simply affecting one generation, this is multiple generations and children who, you know, the issues around stigma, rejection, economic marginalization are not only affecting the women, but they're affecting their children and likely their children's children as a result. I mean, I think one of the most captivating parts of your film was Stevie and the implications of his life. And so I think that is an issue that's not being looked at enough, is the realities of the children born of sexual violence. We have anecdotal evidence about these children, but we really have very little evidence of what happens in the long term. We know that they're, you know, as was shown in the film, that they're marginalized in terms of access to education, health, you know, stigma within the family and the community, but we don't know what happens in the long term. So I think that those are really important issues.
Thank you for that. Just in terms of a follow-up question then, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how we as a global community and as Canadians support the efforts of these extraordinary women.
I mean, I think that what Fiona said is really important, that it's not just about, you know, one, you know, the causes of sexual violence are multifaceted and they're very complex, and there's not one single reason. And so in response, I think we have to have multiple solutions. And as Fiona was talking about, it's not just top-down in terms of policy from government. Obviously, that's important. It's also bottom-up, recognizing and bringing forward the voices and the participation of these very women who have survived this. And so how do we involve women and children in actual policy making that has a direct impact on their lives? I mean, they're ultimately the experts, and I think that we need to be including them more in policy making and participating in these kinds of discussions as to what's best for them instead of us declaring what we think is best for them.
Thank you very much. I think I can just go to you now. I just wanted to ask you, based on your own academic and your practical work experience, in your view, I would just like you to tell us a little bit about your reaction to Fiona's film. If you could just tell us how it resonated with you in terms of your experience.
Sorry. Of course, and like others, I really, really appreciate your documentary. I think to pull out these stories of these women they're telling us a powerful message, actually. I think that's what they're doing. They're telling us that they're not just voiceless victims of this conflict, that they're agents of change, and for the good. I mean, they're the ones rebuilding families, communities, and the country as a whole. They're the ones who are taking care of the traumatized populations, right? They're, of course, the children and others. They're the ones who, against all odds, will try to prosecute or uphold the perpetrators accountable for their actions, right? They're the ones who are feeding the community or, planting seeds. I mean, and if possible, kickstarting again the local economy. And the children as well, of course, because there's a lot of obviously fighting in this basement, and children are often abandoned. Obviously, we saw that. So what happens to these children? What happens to these young boys when they grow up, right? What kind of men do they become without education, without caring, without all the mental health? They're also traumatized. They've lived under the constant threat of violence and privation and so on and so on. So, to me, the most powerful message of this documentary is that they are a powerful agent of change. And if we tap into them, and if we listen to them, then we can move forward.
Thank you for that. So just in terms of those thoughts, can you tell us a little bit about the Canadian Research Institute on Humanitarian Crisis?
Sure, I can tell you about that, of course, but I just wanted to bounce back in terms of the practical experience, and I think one that relates to this, not seeing women as only victims, is also agents of change. And so there's twofold. Two of my main interests is international policy and peacekeeping, and then the other one is narratives. So in terms of peacekeeping and peace sort of agreements, the problem currently, like the latest one that was signed last February between Congo and 12 neighboring countries, is that the peace negotiation process is highly militarized, right? Who are sitting down at these tables, right? They're head of states, they're military men, and this is supposed to be a comprehensive treaty or agreement, which it isn't at all. Not only, so their main focus on doing these agreements and negotiating, they're about cessation of gun violence, but so they're held by military personnel mostly. They're negotiating piece by piece, right? Like M23 was an example as well, right? They're negotiating. So if you join the army and demobilize your group, then I'll give you this and I'll give you that. So we're sorry. So not better, but so we're way off, to the concerns of the women, and we're not attacking the underlying causes of the conflict, right? We're just saying we have to find a way to stop shooting at each other, and then that's it. So we're not talking about the political issues, the social norms that make this violence acceptable and violence towards women acceptable. So there's like a bubble that is completely disconnected from women's groups and from women's interests because they're completely absent from these tables. And their narrative and their stories are not understood.
Thank you. So you could tell us a little bit about what your
organization does. The OCA, not to be confused with the UN Organization for Humanitarian Affairs, is a research center based out of UQAM. And its main objective is to link research academia with fields, with NGOs and practitioners. So it's to inform, with evidence-based, and link up between those who are in the field, humanitarian providers, and those who are researching and trying to find ways to, better. In terms of gender, for example, there's been, not just over the last 15 years or so, there's been huge development in terms of guideline and gender sensitive and that respond to the needs of women and men. So, so this is a bit what we're working on. So we're linking research and humanitarian systems in action.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think at this point I'd like to turn it to the audience because I'm sure you have a lot of questions and thoughts you might want to share, or questions you'd like to pose to our filmmaker or any of our panelists. So if you could just introduce yourself before you ask your question, and then we'll go from there. We have about 15 minutes saved for your questions. So please don't be shy. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share with us or questions. Is there a question? Yes, please, and if you could just introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Mélanie. I'm a finalist in the Faculty of Arts, master's student with Mélanie. And I guess my question would be referring to earlier on what external communities can do, sort of. I understand this is kind of a case study of a broader issue, a specific one that is a really big deal because it's such a large conflict, but it's my understanding that it's been said that one way external actors can influence the situation is by either state actors or NGOs or policy groups sort of pressuring the government, the Congolese government, to deal with the impunity crisis itself in a variety of ways and also working with local actors. So I guess both in a combination with the experience that you guys have both on the ground and kind of studying the situation at large, how practical is it for international groups to try and resolve the impunity crisis when in this particular area our own research and knowledge and like the way that we deal with sexual violence in the Western world is kind of new as well. I mean, in the United States, they're only just uncovering what's probably an epidemic of sexual violence at universities, right? So there's a whole dearth of probably knowledge and research, and there's capacity here that may not be elsewhere. So what are some practical ways that influencing the government and these conversations can actually occur? I don't know if you guys have seen any or if you have any ideas, but it's kind of hard for, I think, some of us to visualize what those practical avenues would be. I don't know if my question makes sense.
Thank you. Who would like to answer that question? We'll answer the question.
It's a good question. The question is kind of vague. It's difficult to answer, actually. I think listening to women and sort of building their capacity in terms of training and small incomes and sort of, because they're doing it right now. I mean, obviously we saw that they're doing it, so we should help those. Like we should help, because they're helping themselves. We should help themselves to get a better, a voice. And obviously, if you want to be heard, you got to also attack the underlying gender dynamics. It's not just about women getting a better voice. It's about changing gender relations between men, how they perceive each other, and if they listen to each other. Because bottom line, who talks and who gets heard is a question of power, right? It's not a question of if you have a saying or not. It's a question of power. So those who maintain this discourse, right, who push away women and marginalize them, have an interest or invested interest in keeping that power. So I say, listen to them, support them, heal them, and then attack the root causes of the conflict that are embedded gender discrimination relations, and it comes to violence and which boils over into a conflict, sexualized violence. I don't know.
Yeah, I think going back to the sort of top-down, bottom-up approach, on a sort of local, small level, one can help support Massacre, donating funds. But I think also on a slightly bigger level, for instance, taking the protocol that was agreed at the summit in the UK in London earlier this year. What I think could be very helpful, and this is just a personal idea, is that actually for many, many years, women like Massacre have been recording these incidents of sexual violence themselves, but there has been no protocol that they have been given that's universal and that could be accepted in the court of law and international court of law that they've been given. And actually, if that was implemented, it would, and it was known locally that these crimes were being stored, the evidence was being stored and uploaded onto an iCloud, which could be possible. That I think this perception of impunity would start to be eradicated, that it would be chipped away, that if locally people knew that the international community, and they do take notice of the international community, people have said to me, the only reason Bosco Ntaganda is at the ICC in The Hague is because he killed a white person, which isn't necessarily true at all, but that is the perception there. And that if they felt that this information was getting to the international community, I think it would actually start to make a difference, and then people thought, actually, maybe there will be some kind of regular, consistent courts of justice. There have been, a number of trials. They had a mobile court specifically that was looking at gender crimes. There was the Minova trials were held earlier this year, which unfortunately were very compromised, but didn't happen, but only 2 of the 39 defendants were found guilty of rape as war crimes. So this needs to be, this again, it can be top down, bottom up, and that's one thing that could be done as well as many other, political and specific things on the ground.
I just wanted to add to that. I agree with what the other panelists have said, but I just think that we really have to be a bit cautious about the whole idea of going to some other country and helping people. I think so. If we want to have any kind of engaged global citizenship, it has to be about empowering those women. So I think that's just a caution about how we use international human rights and how we see the people that we're going to deepest, darkest Africa to save, perhaps. Are there any other questions? Did you have a question?
I did, yes.
Yes, please go ahead and then we'll come to you.
Hi, my name is Vrinda. I'm a second-year undergrad in International Development Studies and Sociology, and I'm also a student of Mélanie, actually.
I didn't make it mandatory.
3 credits.
So my question, I'm not really sure if this actually pertained to the movie directly, but kind of bouncing off what you said about breaking the silence and everybody being involved, I'm just wondering about where is the position of men in kind of making strides towards solutions of gender violence. Because seeing most people, the people in the movie, there were hardly any men, and the panelists are all women too. I'm just wondering if, what is men's role in helping making strides towards solution, like I said, and would we get anything out of listening to men in terms of gender-based violence? Because we've listened to military men and politicians, but the perpetrators, the people who came out of gender-based violence, the people who are involved are more than just the women themselves. There are also, you mentioned, their sons, their daughters, their husbands, and I'm just wondering if we can get anything out of that.
I can try. First of all, that's a really fantastic comment, and I think that there is a missing space on this panel that should see a male voice. I think that it's very, again, what is really important about the film is that it does look at the perpetrators. I think we need to understand, and if we only look at the voices of the victims, and we are missing a piece, and we need to, although it's not always savory to hear, I think it does help us understand and help us in terms of further research and policy and where that's needed. As to how we get men involved, I think we need to see a greater male presence that are advocating as part of the issue. And I think that there is a real silence. And how do we get men involved? How do we get men to be advocates on behalf of women and men? So it's a broader question that I think needs to filter through all of the levels that we've been talking about today, whether it's the top down or the bottom up. That we need to be able to encourage men to be part of the conversation and to be integral to the conversation.
So if I can quickly just so we're clear, violence against women is not a women's issue. It's a gender issue. It's a power issue. Right? So if you're going to tackle the issue of violence against women, you can't just focus on, you gotta get at the heart issue. You gotta get at the root of the cause, which are gender-based relations and then unequal power distribution between the two genders. So, and then on the other thing, I mean, we didn't see it in this particular documentary when the military man gathers all the other military men. And I've seen another reportage where the chief or whoever, the commander, is giving, you know, fouetté and all that, getting motivated. And he was supposed to be the sexual violence expert, and he was supposed to sensitize these military men about the issue. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, great, you're talking about sexual violence. It's fantastic. It's like a milestone. It's never used to talk about it. Because it used to be collateral damage. It's just the way it is. Like, do what we want. And now we're talking about it. So I'm like, fantastic. Oh, sorry. So, okay, so, and then later on in this documentary, we hear the same man who's gender responsible, or, you know, for the prevention, or this person who's responsible for the prevention of sexual violence. And then he describes a little bit how he met his wife. And he goes on to describe that he walked into this village, saw this beautiful woman, and said, well, she's mine. I like her, I'm going to take her. And I'm going, oh God. That's the person responsible for sexual violence. I mean, the root cause of this violence is already in his perception of his right to just take whatever woman he wants because that's what his desire is. And we see it again in the documentary, right? I want her, I saw her, I got her. And, you know, so until we attack this sort of mind frame of this, we'll never get anywhere, and we have to talk to, you know,
I think just a very small addition to that is that although the majority of women are rejected, there are men who stand by their wives and their daughters and their sisters and do take them back. When I was in Shabunda, I went back in 2005 and there was a really, you know, very touching couple who the husband had stood by his wife and she'd had to have a number of operations, and in fact they managed to have another baby after she'd been operated on and gone home and got better. So, you know, it's not completely blanket, and you know, I wouldn't have been able to make Seeds of Hope without amazing Congolese colleagues who are men and who have the trust of the women to help, you know, translate and talk to them. So they are part of the solution as well. Thank you. Would you like to ask a question?
The name's John Wilson. I'm just an ordinary man, and I'd like to ask the question really as an ordinary man, because I came out of that film feeling somewhat ashamed at the male role in this. And it would be easy to define this as a testosterone effect. My question really is, and it comes to your comment, Mélanie, about the position of power. And I wonder whether there's any evidence that women in power go through some of the same things. Women soldiers, women in business, bullies that appear through the same way. Can analogies be drawn through power rather than sexuality, or is this a gender-based issue?
Wow, yeah, very good question. Men. I'm losing my train of thoughts here. Maybe someone can jump in. I lost my feet.
I mean, the one thing that I've worked with women who've been participants in violence in war, girl soldiers and women soldiers, and they will tell you that many of them felt empowered holding a gun, that they had an incredible amount of control and power over others, and it also increased their own status within an armed group where they had a secondary status that, as a result of participating in violence, their rank within the armed group increased. Now, what's important to keep in mind, however, is this is contextual, and that, you know, they were always relegated to a secondary status in relation to men. And in the post-war period, where they felt empowered during the war, most of them will tell you that they lost their power in the aftermath, and they were relegated again to a very marginal position. So I think the power issue has to be contextualized to, who are we talking about? In what context are we talking about it? So it's, I think you can't necessarily take away the gender component from the reality of what's happening.
Thank you. We can go to the next question. Go ahead, please. Yes.
Mine is a very simple question for Fiona. Actually, I'm from the Brazilian Consulate here in Montreal.
Can you speak up a little bit? Sorry.
I'm sorry,
Speak a
my
little
name
louder.
is Marissa. I'm from the Brazilian Consulate in Montreal. My question is a very simple one because it was very striking to me to see the perpetrators had their faces protected and not the women that were the victims. I can understand why, but it's very ironic that the victims show their faces and not the perpetrators. And I was just wondering how, for obvious reasons, you would have to do that. Otherwise, you wouldn't get their testimony, right? Because they would be punished or whatever. I was just wondering how you negotiate, how you manage to get those perpetrators to speak at all. Because maybe they would just say, no, why should I explain what I do? This is so natural for us. Or so. Okay, this is just...
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's very difficult to get any soldiers to talk to you because they're not allowed to, and you have to go through sort of very impossible sort of paperwork to get permission. So that's one of the reasons. It's not just that they were perpetrators of rape, that they were anonymous. It was because they were in uniform soldiers as well.
Yes, I thought it was an amazing thing that you managed to get somebody to.
Well, a lot of that, was due to the Congolese colleagues that I was working with at the time, and I think it was one of those moments where Minova was still very, very militarised. It was we filmed in February. What was it? I can't remember now. Yes, February 2013, I think. Was it February 2013? February 2014? And so it was still very militarised. It was very fresh after the event. It was only a couple of months after the event, and there was a certain sense of presenting it to them as a chance to talk about how they felt about the incident, because they, as they mentioned, some of them mentioned, they felt very betrayed by their orders to withdraw from Goma, and there was this extraordinary irony that they were very bitter and angry that they had left their own wives in Goma, who some were targeted by the M23 and were raped as punishment rapes by the M23. And so they arrived in Minova. They were very angry that they'd been ordered to withdraw when they thought it was unnecessary, that actually they could have attacked Goma and forced the M23 to withdraw themselves. So they felt this was their opportunity to sort of put the record straight, and their actions, the two that talked about raping, it was kind of part of talking about what happened, and they seemed to be relatively open about it in that they said, if the commander is called and punished, then we come forward, but if he's not, then we won't either. So I think it was one of those sort of instances where everything sort of fell into place, and a lot was to do with the Congolese journalists that I worked with who found them, who knew the area very well. He's from that area. He knew a lot of the commanders who were there and could go to the soldiers and get them to come forward for us.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask that last question. I wanted to ask you, Fiona, have you had a chance to show this film in Congo, and what was the response, the reaction to the film?
Well, the Pulitzer Centre have shown it to Mexico and some of the women, and there was apparently I haven't personally done it, but there was a very good response, and I've been back and filmed with her since, and I hope that my next film will actually be about the children of rape, and will be about Stevie's story.
Okay, well, we're looking forward to seeing that film. With that, I'd like to thank the sponsors for this event, the British Consulate and the Institute for Gender Sexuality and Feminist Studies. Thank you for making this event possible. Thank you to the panelists, thank you to Fiona, and also thank you very much to the audience for coming out on this night and watching the film. So thank you, and please join us for some wine and drinks outside. If you want to know how you could possibly help, there are little envelopes over there for donations if you feel so inclined, so please.
And just to add that also, if you go to Seeds of Hope film website, there's a Take Action and link into that as well. Thank you.